47 luxury homeowners spent 6 months wondering whether their toilets would flush, and the strangest part is that none of them blamed the right person at first. They blamed the county, they blamed contractors, they blamed bad luck, and a few of them even blamed me. What they didn't realize was that every clogged pipe, every dead fountain, every angry HOA meeting traced back to one simple decision somebody made when they thought a cattle rancher wouldn't notice what was happening under his own land. My name is Wade Mercer, and I run a cattle ranch outside a little place called Red Creek Valley. 320 acres of dry grass, stubborn cattle, rusted gates, and enough dust to coat the inside of your lungs by noon. It's not glamorous, but it's mine. My grandfather bought the first section of that land. After coming home from Korea, my father expanded it, and when they passed, I took over. Some people see empty fields when they drive past. I see 40 years of memories. I see every fence post my father hammered into the ground. I see every drought we survived and every winter storm we thought might finish us off. About half a mile east of my property sits Silver Cove Estates, one of those upscale developments that seem to appear overnight. Huge homes, designer landscaping, imported stonework, swimming pools bigger than some public parks. The kind of neighborhood where people hire other people to walk their dogs. I never had a problem with them, at least not at first. Folks can spend their money however they want. My issues started when some of them began acting like the entire valley existed for their convenience. Over the years, I dealt with little things. Lost golf carts wandering onto my pasture. Residents complaining about cattle smells drifting across the fence line. One woman actually called animal control because she thought my bulls looked aggressive. They're bulls. That's kind of the job description. Most of the time, I'd laugh it off. No sense fighting every battle. Then one August morning, everything changed. The heat had already settled in before sunrise. I was checking water troughs in the south pasture when I noticed something strange near the ridge. Fresh dirt. Lots of it. At first, I figured maybe county crews had been working along the easement road, but as I drove closer, my stomach started tightening. It was a trench. A massive trench. It cut straight through my grazing land like somebody had taken a giant knife and sliced the property open. I climbed out of the truck and just stood there staring. Fence sections were gone. Tire tracks covered the pasture. One of my underground water lines had been damaged and muddy water was bubbling through the dirt. For a minute, I honestly wondered if I was looking at the wrong property. Then reality hit. Somebody had done this on purpose. Somebody had approved this. Somebody thought they had the right. I spent the next hour following the trench. The farther I went, the angrier I got. Survey markers stood every few hundred feet. Construction flags fluttered in the wind. Eventually, I found a laminated permit attached to a wooden stake. That's where things stopped making sense. The permit listed an emergency wastewater expansion project serving Silver Cove Estates. It referenced an access agreement. It referenced a utility easement. And right there at the bottom was my signature. Except it wasn't my signature. It looked close enough that somebody unfamiliar with my paperwork might believe it, but I'd signed thousands of documents over the years. I knew exactly how my name looked. Someone had forged it. I remember sitting in my truck afterward with the permit in my lap, staring out across the pasture while my hands shook on the steering wheel. Not because of the property damage. Not even because of the money. It was the disrespect. Somebody had looked at my land, looked at my rights, looked at my name, and decided none of it mattered. That afternoon, I drove into town and visited the county records office. The woman behind the desk knew me. Her face changed the second she saw the documents. Within an hour, she confirmed what I already suspected. The permits were real. The project was real. The signature was not, which raised an even bigger question. How had construction crews already completed so much work without anyone catching it? That's when another employee quietly mentioned something interesting. The president of Silver Cove's Homeowners Association had personally pushed the project through after claiming delays would create a public health emergency. His name was Grant Holloway. I met him twice. Both times he'd spoken to me like I was an obstacle rather than a neighbor. Suddenly, a lot of pieces started fitting together. But the biggest surprise was still waiting for me. Because when I started pulling old property records, searching for evidence to prove how badly they'd crossed the line, I discovered something that changed the entire game. something that made their million-dollar neighborhood far more dependent on my ranch than any of them could have imagined. The next morning, I was back at the county archives before most people had finished their first cup of coffee. I wasn't looking for revenge yet. Honestly, I was still hoping there was some explanation buried somewhere in the paperwork. A mistake, maybe. A contractor who got ahead of himself. Some bureaucratic mess that could be untangled without lawyers and courtrooms. But every document I pulled seemed to push me in the opposite direction. One file led to another, then another, and by lunchtime, I was sitting at a dusty table surrounded by decades of maps, utility diagrams, easement records, and water agreements. That's when I found the first piece. Years earlier, during a severe drought, the county had created an emergency resource plan for the valley. Buried deep inside the plan was a provision most people would never notice. My groundwater well was listed as an emergency backup source for several neighboring developments, including Silver Cove Estates. I actually laughed when I read it because nobody from Silver Cove had ever mentioned it. Not once. They certainly hadn't acted like they depended on anything I owned, but there was in black and white. Then I found the second piece, and that one made me sit back in my chair. The entire wastewater system serving Silver Cove crossed my ranch. Every bit of it. The main collection line ran beneath the southern pasture before connecting to a treatment facility several miles away. The route existed because decades earlier my father had signed a narrowly defined access agreement allowing limited utility placement under specific conditions. Those conditions included written notice, approved maintenance schedules, compensation clauses, and strict limitations on expansion. The new sewer extension they'd installed violated nearly every one of them. Suddenly, the situation looked very different. They hadn't just damaged my property. They'd built critical infrastructure using fraudulent authorization. And the more I studied the documents, the clearer one fact became. Without access through my land, their entire backup water system and wastewater maintenance system became a nightmare. I drove home that evening with a stack of copies sitting on the passenger seat. The sun was dropping behind the hills, painting the pasture gold, and for the first time since discovering the trench, I felt calm. Not happy, not satisfied, just calm. The kind of calm that comes when confusion turns into clarity. My attorney, an old friend named Russell Green, met me the following morning. Russell wasn't flashy. He drove a pickup older than mine and carried legal documents in a tackle box. But he knew property law better than anyone in 3 counties. We spent 4 hours reviewing records at my kitchen table. Every so often he'd remove his glasses and shake his head. Finally he leaned back and said, "Wade, if these records are accurate, they stepped on a landmine." I asked the question I'd been carrying around for 2 days. "What can I actually do?" Russell smiled. "A lot." We spent the next week documenting everything. Drone footage, survey reports, fence damage, waterline repairs, construction impacts. Every photograph added another layer to the case. Meanwhile, Silver Cove continued operating as if nothing had happened. Their landscaping crews trimmed hedges. Their fountains sprayed water 24 hours a day. Their HOA newsletters talked about upcoming wine tastings and holiday decorations. It was almost impressive how completely disconnected they seemed from the storm heading their way. Then came the day I made my decision. I woke before sunrise, poured coffee into a travel mug, and drove to the well controls. The law was clear. The county agreement gave emergency access only under specific conditions. Those conditions no longer existed once the fraudulent easement came into question. By noon, the backup connection feeding Silver Cove had been legally disconnected. Nothing dramatic happened immediately. No alarms, no angry phone calls, just silence. The following day, I moved on to the second issue. The maintenance hatch for the wastewater system sat well inside my fence line. Maintenance crews had crossed my property for years under approved access provisions. Those provisions were now suspended pending legal review. I installed a heavy-duty lock, mounted cameras nearby, and documented everything. Again, completely legal. Again, completely quiet. At first, nobody noticed. Then little changes started appearing around Silver Cove. Landscaping crews reduced irrigation schedules. Decorative fountains stopped running during parts of the day. Residents began posting complaints in community forums about pressure fluctuations. 1 week later, the first knock came at my front door. I opened it to find Grant Holloway standing there beside a black luxury SUV. I'd almost forgotten how polished the man always looked. Perfect haircut, expensive watch, crisp vest despite the heat. He smiled the way people smile when they're trying very hard not to look irritated. "Wait," he said. "We need to talk." I stepped onto the porch. "Then talk." He glanced toward the ranch. "We've received reports that you've interfered with utility access." I couldn't help smiling. Interfered? Locked infrastructure serving private residences. You mean infrastructure built with a forged signature? His smile disappeared. For several seconds, neither of us said anything. Then he tried a different approach. "There may have been administrative errors." "Administrative errors don't usually write my name for me." His jaw tightened. "You're creating problems for dozens of homeowners who had nothing to do with this." "Funny," I replied. Nobody seemed worried about creating problems for me. Grant shifted gears again, this time going straight to intimidation. He mentioned attorneys, county officials, potential lawsuits, financial damages, the whole performance. We finally paused. I handed him a folder. He opened it and frowned. Inside was a detailed invoice prepared by Russell. Property damage, unauthorized excavation, fence replacement, water system repairs, access violations, legal costs, future easement valuation. The total was substantial enough to make most people blink twice. Grant actually laughed. Not because it was funny, because he thought I was bluffing. "You're serious?" he asked. "Completely." He closed the folder and shook his head. "This isn't going anywhere." Then he walked back to his SUV and drove off. For about 10 days, I heard nothing. Then the cracks started widening. The first attorney letter arrived. It contained plenty of legal language and an offer that barely covered the fence repairs. Russell framed it as an insult. We declined. A second offer arrived. Slightly better. Still nowhere close. We declined again. Meanwhile, county inspectors began taking interest in Silver Cove's growing operational problems. Without reliable system access, maintenance schedules slipped. Equipment inspections were delayed. Residents started complaining. Social media posts appeared. Then came the homeowners themselves. One afternoon, I stopped for fuel in town and overheard two Silver Cove residents arguing near the cash register. One blamed the HOA board. The other blamed contractors. Neither understood the full story. But word was spreading. A week later, another development hit. 2 homes in Silver Cove quietly entered the market. Then a third. Rumors moved faster than facts. People always assume the worst when property values are involved. Grant returned near the end of the month. This time he came alone. No polished confidence. No dijerstes might. He looked exhausted. We sat across from each other at my kitchen table where Russell had spread out revised agreements. Grant read every page in silence. The proposed terms weren't complicated. Upfront compensation, long-term access payments, strict maintenance procedures, advanced notification requirements, full acknowledgement of prior violations. Most important of all, every future step taken on my property would require my approval. Halfway through the review, Grant removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. For the first time since this started, he looked less like an HOA president and more like a man realizing he had backed himself into a corner. Finally, he looked up and asked quietly, "If we'd just come to you in the beginning, would you have agreed?" The question hung in the room for a few seconds. Then I answered honestly, "Probably." He stared at the table. I think that hurt more than the numbers. For a moment, neither of us said anything. The old ceiling fan turned slowly above the table, pushing warm ranch air around the room while Grant stared at the agreement in front of him. I remember looking out the kitchen window toward the pasture where a few cattle were gathered near a water trough and thinking about how ridiculous this entire situation had become. Months earlier, all someone had needed to do was knock on my door, shake my hand, explain the project, and treat me like a human being. That's it. We probably could have worked something out over coffee and a legal contract. Instead, somebody chose shortcuts. Somebody decided a forged signature would be easier than a conversation. Somebody assumed a rancher wouldn't notice or wouldn't fight back. Those assumptions ended up costing a lot more than honesty ever would have. Grant eventually picked up his pen. Not dramatically, not angrily, just the way a tired man signs paperwork he wishes he had handled differently months ago. Russell slid the final pages across the table and watched carefully while every signature was completed. Once the last document was signed, Grant leaned back and exhaled. I honestly thought he looked 10 years older than when this started. He stood, gathered his copies, then paused near the doorway. The homeowners are furious, he said. Some of them want the entire board removed. I shrugged. That's between you and them. He nodded slowly. You know, they think you enjoyed this. That one actually made me laugh. Grant, do you know how much time I've wasted dealing with this mess? I would have preferred to spend every minute fixing fences and feeding cattle. He gave a small smile for the first time in weeks. Fair point. Then he left. A few hours later, my phone buzzed while I was repairing a gate near the north pasture. The wire transfer had arrived. The upfront compensation was sitting in the account exactly as agreed. I stared at the notification for a few seconds, then slipped the phone back into my pocket and went back to work. That's probably the least exciting part of the whole story. People imagine some huge celebration, some victory speech. Truth is, I finished repairing the gate and checked on the cattle before dinner. Life on a ranch doesn't stop because money arrives. The next morning, I unlocked the maintenance access point. Later that day, the backup water connection was restored under the new agreement. Within a week, Silver Cove started looking like itself again. The fountains returned. Landscaping crews resumed their schedules. The panic gradually faded. But something had changed. Not just for them. For me, too. Over the following months, I occasionally received maintenance requests from utility companies. Every single one arrived with proper paperwork. Every single one came with advance notice. Every single crew checked in before entering the property. Funny how quickly organizations learn respect when accountability becomes expensive. The HOA board didn't survive the year. Several members resigned. Others lost re-election. From what I heard through local gossip, homeowners spent months arguing over who knew what and when. Lawsuits were threatened. Consultants were hired. Investigations were conducted. I stayed out of it. I had no interest in running their community. I only cared about protecting mine. One evening about 6 months later, I ran into an older couple from Silver Cove at a diner in town. I'd seen them before, but never really spoken with them. The husband walked over while I was paying my bill and introduced himself. Then he surprised me. I wanted to thank you, he said. I probably looked confused because he immediately laughed. Not for shutting everything down, he explained. For exposing what happened. If they were willing to forge your signature, who knows what else they would have done eventually. We talked for 15 minutes. Nice people, reasonable people, the kind of neighbors I would have gladly worked with from start. Driving home that night, I kept thinking about something my father used to say. He believed land wasn't just property, it was responsibility. If you owned something, you protected it. Not because it made you powerful, but because it represented trust. Trust from the people who came before you, and trust from the people who'd come after. Back when I was younger, I thought that sounded old-fashioned. Now I understand exactly what he meant. The real issue was never the trench. It was never the damaged fence, the broken water line, or even the forged signature. The real issue was respect. Once respect disappears, every disagreement gets bigger than it needs to be. Every conflict becomes a battle. Every compromise becomes impossible. Looking back, I don't hate Grant Holloway. I don't even hate the HOA. I think they made a terrible decision and spent a fortune learning why it was terrible. That's different. Hate keeps you trapped in the past. Lessons move you forward. Every month now, right on schedule, the payment arrives automatically. I usually don't even think about it anymore. The cattle certainly don't care. The grass still turns brown in August. The fences still need repairs. My truck still smells like diesel and dust. Life keeps moving. But every once in a while I'll drive along the south pasture where that trench once cut through the land, and I'll remember how close all of this came to ending differently. If one person had chosen honesty over arrogance, none of it would have happened. Then again, if they hadn't made that choice, I never would have discovered how much leverage was buried beneath my own ranch. So maybe that's the strange lesson in all of this. Sometimes the people who think they're taking advantage of you accidentally reveal how much power you had all along. Anyway, that's my story. Now I'm curious what you think. If a wealthy development built critical infrastructure on your property using a forged signature, would you have settled the way I did, or would you have pushed even harder? Was the agreement fair, or did Silver Cove get off easy after everything they caused? Drop your thoughts in the comments because I read every single one, and trust me, on this issue people tend to have some very strong opinions.